On November 1993, AM2, a development group in Sega that was headed by Yu Suzuki, released Virtual Fighter. It was the first arcade fighting game that used polygonal graphics. Upon its release, it was considered revolutionary and groundbreaking for its in-depth fighting engine based on real-world fighting techniques. It wouldn't be long until other video game companies began developing fighting games using polygonal graphics as well. By the end of 1994, Namco delivered their own take on the Virtual Fighter formula with Tekken, which became the first PlayStation game to sell more than 1 million units. In 1996, Namco introduced another fighting game series that featured weapon-based combat named Soul Edge. In that same year, being dissatisfied with modern fighting games, Tomonobu Itagaki and Team Ninja designed and developed Tecmo's Dead or Alive. By now, polygonal fighting games were in full force. It almost became expected from every video game company that was currently making fighting games. Being one of the top developers of fighting games, Capcom began to design fighting games with polygonal graphics as well. They first released Star Gladiator in October 1996. It was a weapon-based fighting game in a sci-fi setting with character designs by Akiman. The gameplay lacked much of the depth found in other fighting games and only saw a release on the PlayStation. To bring their most popular 2D fighting game series to the third dimension, Capcom partnered with Arika, the company founded by former Street Fighter II designer Akira Nishitani. Together they would co-develop and release Street Fighter EX on November 1996. Street Fighter EX's fighting system was a combination of Street Fighter II and Street Fighter Alpha. While the game featured 3D graphics, the matches remained on a 2D plane. This way, the game would have a fighting system similar to the previous entries in the series. The series' 3-level super combo gauge also returned. New additions included the guard break move that could make an opponent dizzy if it made contact, as well as the canceling system. After a regular or special move, the player could immediately follow it up with a super combo move. Along with many familiar characters from Street Fighter's past, Street Fighter EX introduced a brand new cast of characters. Brought over from Street Fighter II were Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Zangief, Guile, Akuma, and Bison. New characters included the ninja siblings Hokuto and Kairi, who share an ominous destiny, Doctrine Dark, a deranged psychopathic killer, Polam Purna, the daughter of a wealthy Arabian man who seeks revenge for the death of her grandfather, Blair Dane, a friend of Polam who joins her in her quest for revenge, Darun Meister, an Indian wrestler and bodyguard to Polam. He was modeled after an international wrestler named the Great Gama, Crackerjack, one of Bison's enforcers who occasionally wields a baseball bat, Alan Snyder, a kickboxer who was designed to resemble renowned martial artist and movie star Chuck Norris, Garuda, a non-human entity made out of souls, and finally, perhaps the most well-known and popular new character from the EX series, Skullomania, a failed salesman who becomes a vigilante crime fighter. After the game was released in arcades, Capcom distributed an update to the game a few months later with Street Fighter EX Plus on March 1997. With this version, all the hidden characters were available by default, including the 2 boss characters Garuda and Bison. 4 more hidden characters were added, which included Evil Ryu, Bloody Hokuto, and the 2 cyborgs Cycloid Beta and Cycloid Gamma. When the game was ported to the PlayStation on July 1997, it received another update and was titled Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha. The game had all the additions from the 2 prior versions and added Sakura and Dulcine to the roster, a hidden bonus stage from Street Fighter II, and CG animated endings for each of the characters. The game was first met with generally positive reviews upon its release. Longtime Street Fighter fans felt that the game was worthy of standing with the best in the series. Thanks to Akira Nishitani, Street Fighter EX managed to achieve maximum performance out of its game engine and performed well. However, the game didn't appear nearly as impressive as other polygonal fighters at the time and was seen as a disappointment among fans. So while the game did poorly in arcades, it had a much bigger audience on the PlayStation. Still, Capcom and Arika strived onward by releasing a sequel to the game in 1998 with Street Fighter EX2. The game retained all the features from the previous game and introduced Excel combos. When initiating an Excel combo, players could connect basic and special moves together much faster and easier for a limited amount of time. EX2's initial roster only brought back 12 characters from EX Plus Alpha, but added 6 more characters. Familiar faces included Blanca and Vega from Street Fighter II. The new faces included Sharon, a gun-wielding hitwoman and Blair's sister, Hayate, a Japanese swordsman, Shadowgeist, a costume vigilante similar to Skullomania, and Nanase, a staff-wielding young girl. Once again, an enhanced version was released entitled Street Fighter EX2 Plus in 1999. This version brought back all the characters excluded from EX2 with the exception of Alan, Blair, and Hayate, who were removed from the game entirely. Sagat from Street Fighter II made a return along with more new characters. They were Volcano Rosso, an Italian martial artist, and Aria, a girl with a large mechanical arm. There was also a new boss character named Bison too. The Excel combos were slightly tweaked to give the player less limitations when it came to its execution. A new gameplay feature in EX2 Plus was the Meteor combo, a more powerful super combo that can only be performed with the 3-level super combo gauge. While these technically existed in prior EX games for certain characters, now each character had their own distinct Meteor combo. Street Fighter EX2 was ported to the PlayStation a few months after its arcade release with new and familiar game modes. It also brought back Hayate as a secret character. Overall, the game was a huge visual improvement over the first EX. The game remained on a 2D plane, but the 3D characters looked much sharper and performed even better thanks to improved hardware. With Street Fighter EX2 Plus, the series established its reputation for insane combos. Unfortunately, the game was met with much more mixed reviews than its prior installment. While some praised its solid foundation as a fighting game, others felt it had less of an impact compared to other fighting games at the time. Ultimately, there just weren't enough new features to interest anyone who had become bored with the original. On March 1999, Sony announced that the PlayStation 2 had begun development and would release a year later. Shortly after its announcement, Capcom and Arica announced the third console installment in the Street Fighter EX series that would be coming exclusively for the PlayStation 2 as one of the first launch titles. Street Fighter EX3 had all the gameplay features from EX2 Plus with a few variations and new modes. The original guard break move was replaced by the heart attack move, which, while similar in function, could be blocked. There were also other additions such as the critical parade and momentary combo. EX3 also introduced tag team battles, dramatic battles similar to the Alpha series, and even 4-player matches. The other new feature was the character edit mode. Here the player could continually upgrade a fighter named Ace with any of the special moves and combos from the other characters. The game was released on the same launch date of the PlayStation 2 in Japan on March 4th, 2000. Immediately, the game felt unimpressive in many ways. Street Fighter EX3 suffered from long load times and large portions of slowdown. Many other aspects made the entire game feel rushed. Other than the customizable character Ace, there were no new characters in Street Fighter EX3. Plus, most of them had to be unlocked and some EX veterans remained absent. After defeating the final boss, the player didn't receive a CG ending for the character, but instead a piece of text that tells of what happens in strangely cryptic sentences. The game's audio portion was acceptable but not impressive, featuring mostly music and sound effects that were carried over from prior installments. When the game was released in the US, Capcom updated the game with a fully optimized code to get rid of load times, visible slowdown, and frame rate drops. Capcom actually released the game a couple days before the US launch of the PlayStation 2 as well. The game was met with generally below average reviews when it came out. While some felt the game brought a lot of new elements that made EX3 a lot of fun to play, others saw it as the end of Street Fighter in the third dimension. Despite Capcom and Arica's efforts, Street Fighter EX3 remained inferior to other fighting games at the time both critically and commercially. Today, the Street Fighter EX series is widely regarded as part of the dark times in the Street Fighter franchise. Capcom continued striving to surpass other polygonal fighting games, but never saw the kind of success they had with their 2D fighting games. Many other fighting games were produced by Capcom that only garnered receptions that ranged from underrated to downright abysmal. However, one of them managed to stand out and remain one of the best polygonal fighting game series ever produced by Capcom. Rival Schools United by Fate was a polygonal fighting game released by Capcom in 1998. As the title would suggest, the premise of the game revolved around students from various academic and athletic backgrounds who would battle one another while investigating some recent disturbances in their city. The gameplay system had a 4-button control scheme but borrowed from many of the mechanics from all the current Street Fighter games. Players would choose a team of 2 characters and fight against another 2-character team. The actual fights were one-on-one, which led to tag battles and team attacks. When the game was later ported to the PlayStation, it came with 2 discs that had a surprisingly large amount of extras. Not only did it come with the original game in the standard modes like in most home versions of fighting games, but it also introduced a new animated intro and ending, added voiceover to the single-player story mode, and 2 new playable characters. Hoping to target the Street Fighter audience, Sakura was included as a playable character as well. Along with the main game, there was a second disc named the Evolution Disc. This disc featured several new mini-games and a character creation mode that played like a dating simulation game. When the game was localized, this mode was scrapped due to time constraints and the necessary localization. Another version was released exclusively in Japan that added more characters, mini-games, and a new school simulation mode that further developed the Rival Schools universe. In 2000, Rival Schools received a sequel in arcades that would come to be known as Project Justice Rival Schools 2. While Street Fighter Sakura was removed from the roster, the game brought in more characters each with a unique school-related background. It also made changes to the fighting system established in Rival Schools, such as allowing for 3-character teams. The game was ported to the Dreamcast and featured another character creation mode in the form of a board game, a mode that was once again taken out due to the localization required. Both games in the Rival School series were well received by critics and fans. Not only did it provide a solid fighting system, but players also loved the game's unique premise and tongue-in-cheek humor when it came to the overall combat. However, since the series failed to garner as wide of an audience as other fighting games, Capcom decided not to develop more games in the series. Project Justice would be the last installment in the Rival Schools series. With the rise of polygonal fighting games in the late 90s, Capcom was never able to reach the status of their competitors like they once did. While other companies continue to push their fighting games with newer installments even to this day, Capcom decided to put off developing 3D fighters as they had been generally viewed as failed offshoots. Because of this, many of Capcom's polygonal fighting games have never seen any release beyond their initial console ports. In fact, the original characters created from the EX series have never appeared in any of Capcom's other video games. Blair Dame and Alan Snyder appeared in the Arca-developed fighting layer, while Skullomania made an appearance in the music game Technic-Tix and H-Tex Fighter Maker. Arca has since moved away from Street Fighter and Capcom entirely to develop video games in other genres. To this day, the hope for either series to receive a new installment continues, but the chances of it becoming a reality remain slim. Instead of Capcom rising up to their former success, fans began to lose interest in Street Fighter and took a break from the series. With the future of Street Fighter appearing grim following the EX series, Capcom took another chance at revitalizing the series with what some fans never expected: the birth of a new generation. Next time, in part 5 of this Street Fighter retrospective, Capcom takes a bold and risky step with the official third chapter of Street Fighter. The series finally grows up and moves on by introducing a brand new cast of characters. Despite its new approach to the Street Fighter formula, it remains one of the most debated entries in the Street Fighter series.
The third strike, y'all, is Street Fighter 3.